Welcome to Insight and Influence, a podcast presented by C&G Stategies, bringing you insightful conversations from influential people, including government officials, industry leaders, and advocates from across the state.
Well, welcome to Insight and Influence. This is a kind of unusual one because we're interviewing ourselves. But who better to talk about what's going on in the state budget and in Harrisburg than Tony Crisci and Rob Vescio. So I want to just take a minute to ask both of you guys to introduce yourselves and talk about how long you've been doing this. Because often you guys are the ones on the other side of the table and people don't necessarily know that about you. So let's start with Tony.
Oh, I was going to let age go before beauty, but okay.
Well, we want you to go first. I mean, that'll take up the whole 20 minutes to talk about your vast experience.
I know. That's true. Pre-79, post-79. Thanks. I've been a full-time lobbyist, an attorney by trade, but a full-time lobbyist since 1991. So I'm going to take us back during this discussion about the budget stalemate in 1991 for all you historians. And I've represented clients exclusively with state government relations since 1991. We have a vast array of clients, and last couple of years had the pleasure of joining up with Rob and creating C&G Stategies.
And Tony, you are the general counsel for the firm and one of the four partners.
Correct, which is why I keep my law license.
That's a very good thing. And Rob, how about you?
Well, I don't have the vast experience of Tony Crisci. So I came in 1996, post-college, and worked for government for about 10 years. Switched over to lobbying and been there ever since. So it was a pleasure when Tony and his team joined us at our past firm and came together here at C&G Stategies, where I can't believe it's going to be almost 2 years that we created this. And it's been going good, and our clients have been phenomenal. But, my background with a lot of Republican politics, but as people know and people who work with me, it's been like our firm. We are a bipartisan firm. And I think our members, Tony, myself, and other team members of our firm, including you, Amie, definitely have reaches on both parties and are respected individuals.
I appreciate that. Rob, since he didn't say it, is also a partner and the chief financial officer at the firm.
That is correct. Thanks.
That's good. I'm glad I got that part right. So before we get into what's happening with the budget today, let's do just a little pre-education, if you would. Talk to me a little bit about what the budget process looks like normally, what its timing is, how it starts, what you see throughout the process.
Why don't I start with that, Tony, because you can answer why things are late these days and what court case and all that legal jargon. So the budget process kicks off in February with the governor's budget address, where the governor maps out his blueprint or their blueprint, depending on if we have a future female governor, right?
Thank you.
You're welcome. And so we, the legislature then gets that document and takes it in the budget hearings. The budget hearings then go on for a few weeks with the idea of, analyzing all the programs and so forth within the recommended spending bill that the governor unveiled. And then it's supposed to go into its process of getting bills introduced and going through the committee process, looking at every department. And it's supposed to be done by June 30th. That's usually the constitutional deadline. However, things changed. There was a court case that happened. What year was that? That was like 20.
Yeah, back in the first term of the Rendell administration. So
yeah, Rendell's years, where essentially said, and I'll let, Tony can probably get more detail than I am, but that it was a lawsuit that said that you have to pay state employees. Back prior to that court case, July 1st, state employees did not get paid, only the essential ones. So that court case changed everything in terms of pressure points for why the budget has to get done by June 30th.
Which will bring me back to the 1991 budget during the Casey administration, when that court case did not exist, that precedent did not exist. And on June 30th at midnight, actually 12:01, state employees stopped getting paid. And the government literally did shut down, to the point where PSECU, which is the State Employees Credit Union, would give their depositors, which are state employees, loans, low interest loans, and sometimes no interest loans, so they could feed themselves for the next. I think it resolves sometime in August. So yeah, it's the court case made a big difference in terms of putting the pressure on the General Assembly to pass a budget.
So what is there still today that provides any pressure to get things done? We're in October now, obviously a few months late to say the least. And if state employees are still getting paid, what's the impact of not having a budget?
Funding. So essentially the school districts, the human services, childcare, higher ed, like essentially all those organizations, county governments, they're using their reserves. Once those start drying up, which in some cases are happening this month in October, the major ones we hear by the holidays. So we're looking at like after Thanksgiving, around that time frame, where a lot of school districts will essentially either have to shut their doors or there's just going to be crisis in some of these areas. And so that's the pressure point that the legislature will finally have to act or get some money out the door. Whether or not that is a full budget, if it's going to be, we've heard stopgap. There's a lot of things they're talking about, but I think once you go in the stopgap mode, that's going to be, we're going to become a DC, continuing resolutions at that point. So I think they want to avoid that. So the pressure point is that these counties, these school districts, these childcare facilities, they're going to need them probably in the next couple of weeks, if not maybe a month. They probably have. I don't know. Is there anything else we're missing there, Tony?
No, one of the options for the school districts, and in fact, one of our clients who had to go out and get low interest loans, line of credit to keep operating, is that at some point, as these school districts or county governments who are providing essential services have to go out and get these loans, that interest rate is not likely reimbursed by the Commonwealth. So that interest rate payment will ultimately fall to the taxpayers, which once the taxpayers figure that out, that might put a little bit more pressure on the members of the General Assembly.
Yeah, one of the things in the news this week is I think that 6 of the 67 counties in the state have already gone out for lines of credit, and that 3 of those 6 are already furloughing staff or have at least started talking about it. And so it's really impactful from top to bottom. Even those agencies and organizations that have fund balances that they can rely on can't dip into those coffers forever. And so that rainy day fund, what becomes even more important or is less full, if you will, when there's an emergency down the line. So let's talk a little bit about this year. Again, as we already said, it's October at this point. So let's rewind. Let's go back to February and the governor's proposal. What did it look like? What were we talking about back in February?
You had a number about 51.3 billion. I think that's what the number was. It's been so long at this point. He came out with, investments, of course, in education. Was always the biggest one. A lot of governors, that's their focal point. The 51.3 was higher than what the revenue collections were at about 47 billion. But he was trying to make it up with, legalization of adult use cannabis, the games of skill, tax and regulating those. He was going to try to generate another billion or so from those two entities. And then that's how he was balancing the budget. The problem is they did not pass, adult use cannabis. They did not pass games of skill / gaming. So with those revenues, those new revenue sources off the table, this is where the General Assembly is saying, okay, well, we didn't pass them. We don't have the support yet for those two entities. So we're trying to live within our means in terms of the budget and trying to spend not only what we bring in, and then the rainy days, where were we at, like $9 billion?
Like $7 to $9 billion, right?
Or let's $7 or $9 billion in the rainy day, right? Ain't shoving money.
And he wanted to spend another $1.9 billion of the rainy day fund to help balance.
Yeah, so he's using $1.9 billion of rainy day. So he's using some of the surpluses or / rainy day to also help budget that. And that's where the crux of the whole fight is the spend number. Is the Republicans passed last year's budget, I guess, as a stopgap. I guess I don't want to call it stopgap right now. They passed last year's budget, the Senate to the House. That's what the Senate Republicans did. So, at least show that we can get money out the door for school districts and counties while they negotiate the other increases. The House Democrats, of course, came back and said, no, let's just do this all at once now. And, let's just put all the investments where we want to put them in place of where we have agreements on and try to get that done. So, the governor's where he like that spending plan back in February, that 51.3, I mean, that doesn't exist right now. Where we are now is they're just maybe some of the education increases, but I think what else was in there that's probably still alive. I don't think there's really much left.
No, I mean, I think it focuses on basic ed funding and some of the ancillary things in basic ed funding, special ed and other things.
So cannabis was it dead on arrival, or did it happen later? Same with gaming stuff and some of the other things he proposed, or was that something that over the last few months that they still tried to gather support for?
I think in terms of the cannabis side of it, I think the Senate Republicans considered it dead on arrival. I think there were some in the House Democratic caucus that thought they could get some form of cannabis, and they had introduced bills. And they actually passed one that the Senate defeated because it involved some regulations that the Senate just can't live with philosophically. But I think so that particular piece of the funding probably was off the table right from the get-go. The skill game side of it, I think there was a hope that they could regulate skill games and bring in revenue. Again, these were not going to be massive amounts of immediate revenue. But if they could just project that they were going to raise $500 million through skill games, then you can go out and bond that money. And you would have the revenue to keep going. But even the skill games now has kind of it's either hot or cold. We've heard that there's still negotiations on the skill games, and there's legislation ready to be dropped in at the last minute because all 5 caucuses worked on it. But we haven't seen it yet, and I'm not so sure we're going to see it before this budget stalemate ends.
So a month or so ago, transit and highway funding and those conversations were still in the mix. What was the conversation there and what happened?
So the biggest issue was out in the Philadelphia region with SEPTA. I mean, we have Pittsburgh Regional Transit out of the Pittsburgh area as well. They also have issues, but not at the level of SEPTA. SEPTA put significant pressure on a package which was about $300 million for mass transit only, and then there was a potential agreement with heavy highway. So traditionally, whenever mass transit or heavy highway are looking for funding, the other also. So it's a package. So you have both because that helps, Republicans in the T with heavy highway, and then Democrats in the cities with mass transit. What happened at the end of the day was the legislature worked with the governor, where they came up with a proposal for essentially capital money, the use of capital money for mass transit. They had what they call, I guess, a surplus or some type of unused portion of that
Capital, yeah.
right? And so they petitioned to stay in the governor's office to essentially allow them to use their capital money for operations for the next 2 years. I mean, it kicks the can down the road is what it does. And then, so there'll be nothing on heavy highway at all, because at this point with mass transit alleviating their own problems for 2 years, then this issue will kind of be a 2027 issue.
So what's outstanding? What's holding up the budget? If people are looking at this and saying, okay, mass transit and highways, the funding, I see Tony's laughing already, are off the table. We sort of have skill games ready to drop in when we're ready. Cannabis is not happening. What's holding everything up? Where are we?
classic Republican Democrat. It's spending versus not spending.
Yep.
That's what it is. There's nothing else.
It is definitely, the Republicans are of the philosophical belief that you spend what you take in. The Democrats think that, if you invest in the Commonwealth, that you'll raise more revenues in certain areas. Republicans aren't willing to take that lead. And so until they can, traditionally a budget, the first thing that happens when a budget is done is somebody says, the parties say, here's our spend number. Let's fill in the lines. They haven't gotten to that, here's our spend number yet.
Is there anything that moves the needle? How does the federal government shutdown impact things? I mean, I saw a news article earlier today. It said just that the federal government is the third largest employer in Allegheny County alone. I have to imagine that is true in Philadelphia and some of these other large urban areas. So how's that impacting employment and all these other things as well?
As longer it drags out. Right now, we were talking to some of the clients in the space that receive federal money. Their early analysis is they're okay for a few days. But as it gets further down the path, it's going to magnify here at the state because they're going to have to get money out the door. So this could change and alter things depending on what happens and how long they think it's going to take DC to pass their continuing resolution, whatever they're calling it these days. So it's a stay tuned at this point.
Yeah, it's kind of like the perfect storm, right? They all happened at one time. And I don't think, just in some of the rumors we heard at the Capitol, a lot of these agencies for the state are trying to figure out what the impact is.
Yeah.
Is HHS going to continue to get its Medicaid payments? And those sorts of things, they're in uncharted territories.
Can we talk about Medicaid real quick? I know that, with the shift in the federal government to putting more of the impetus on the states to really manage that and fund it, is that part of the conversation happening in the budget, or is it something that's down the road because it's a longer term impact?
I think that the Medicaid and the SNAP provisions that are typically discussed during the budget process were probably in the forefront. Because of the new administration in DC, the big beautiful bill cutting back some of those things or adding some requirements to them. I think that has always been a discussion point in the budget. Because don't forget, before we finish up a fiscal year, the General Assembly normally passes a supplemental, which is part of the budget, to pay for the overruns in Medicaid and other social services, and human services. So I think absolutely that was part of the discussion. And there is a fear as to how much money it's going to take. And there's a discussion of do we have to curtail our waste and fraud and abuse that the Trump administration believes every state has. And it's pretty clear, like in the SNAP arena, which is the short-term benefit to those who need to buy food to exist. There was an error rate of close to 17%. Within a week from the Trump administration saying you're going to need to get your error rate down, HHS got it down to a little around 10% error rate. And there could be some improvements there, but it takes time. So that I could imagine the leaders sitting there saying, so how much is this really going to cost us? And I can imagine HHS, as all good negotiators do, it's going to cost this amount. And then General Assembly says, we're only going to give you this amount. So I think it was very much a part of the discussion.
Appreciate that. So if you're talking to clients right now, what is it that you're telling them? What are their concerns? What are their challenges? And what are you saying to them about what's happening with the budget? I know that you guys are really great about following up with clients. So they already know this. They're not going to learn it in the podcast, but I think it's important really just to have a understanding of what those conversations are with clients that are very much, in many cases, relying upon the funding or formulas that are in the state budget and are sort of being held hostage right now as well.
Well, I mean, we're advising our clients regularly, just we got to keep the pressure. I mean, we started back after the budget address on some of the issues that we're working on. But you can't, just because we're in this period, and I know we've met with these elected officials time and time again, we got to keep the pressure on. They need to know what's out here. They need to know what is and what's not happening with not having a budget. So, I mean, we're advancing our clients' interests to ensure that we're trying to defend in case anything drastic occurs, which is really going to be the model for the next 2 or 3 years now, depending on what happens fiscally in Pennsylvania, where we're playing a lot of defense, but also making sure that investments are still being thought of and made in some of these programs that are needed. Like, for instance, we represent childcare. The governor came out with an initiative for $55 million for retention of childcare workers. It's big. I think the facilities themselves are having a hard time keeping their employees. They need this to ensure that they get these employees. And so, that's one of the things we're working on that we want to make sure stays. We've had great bipartisan support early on, but as we all know, as this keeps dragging out and they start looking at the spend number, does a program like that is needed and survive at the end of the day? If we don't keep that pressure on with the electeds, then that's how that stuff falls in the wayside when they come to a deal, and then they just put something on the desk of the House and Senate members and say, vote for this. It's up or down. Like, there's no changes. So, you can't wait that long. You got to keep doing it, keep putting the pressure up, because the more that members are talking to leadership and saying, I know you're working on a spend number. I know you're working on a final budget, but this is essential. It needs to be part of the final framework.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, Rob mentioned childcare. We also have the community colleges that have already missed, I believe, 2 payments of their state appropriation. And it wasn't too long ago, I think it was 2023, that they went all the way to December before they got payments. And they had to take out those line of credit, and they had to spend, of the 15 community colleges, I think collectively they spent $3 million on interest payments. But not only do we keep them informed and the clients that actually have a direct general appropriation, we have to keep our other clients informed, because typically the budget, everything revolves around the budget in Harrisburg. You'll see other pieces of policy legislation pass or not pass, and somehow they're connected to that budget. And typically also in the fall, where we are in October, the caucuses begin their fall session agenda. So as things delay, so do those policy initiatives. There are some issues that can literally suck the air out of the Capitol. The budget and a budget stalemate is that one thing that's all focused now. It's just, let's get the budget done, and everything else gets pushed to the side. Now, in some cases, that's a great thing, right? They can talk about the budget as long as they want, because bad issues don't happen. But in other cases, when you want to try to get something done and advocate positively for something, having this hanging over their heads is not a good thing.
So here's my last question for you guys. Is if you had a magic wand or a crystal ball, where do you think we are before we're able to resolve this year's budget? And no pressure.
I'm still going to be optimistic. I think they can get something accomplished in the next few weeks, by Thanksgiving at the latest. But I think, they're going to come to some conclusion of this. I think it's going to be around a $50 billion spend. It's going to be probably some policy that's going to be needed, changes or something, whether it's a major issue or a more minor issue. to get those votes. But, this is a time where, they're going to have to really come together in this purple state and figure this out, because what are we, 4 months away from the next budget address? And that's the other thing is you have, you can kind of use that as almost like an 18-month budget versus just this current fiscal year, and try to set that up for next year as well. And that's the hope, right? That would be the case. But, I think it'll be about a $50 billion budget, and that they'll get it resolved. I think everyone's going to get paid, get through it. But then I think they're also going to be right back on some level next year, because remember, the governor's up for re-election. The entire House is up for re-election, which is a 1-seat majority for House Democrats. And you have half the state Senate. And for the Republicans, it's a lot of their Southeast seats. So there's going to be some very contentious races next year.
Yeah, I will stay on the optimistic side only because I probably lost the pool at the end of June. But I do think, hopefully we will see something before the end of October. And, Rob mentioned we're 4 months away from the next budget speech, which is very, very, it's coming up on us quickly. And the agencies are already submitting their budgets for next fiscal year to the Office of Budget. I don't know how they're doing that. They're good luck. So they are doing that. And I also think, and I agree with Rob, next year's an election year. And I think what this budget has proven finally is that we just don't bring enough revenue into Pennsylvania. And the cold, hard reality is the fact that we have one of the lowest personal income tax rates at 3.07. Granted, Texas, Florida, 0%, but they tax you in some other places. But, I think for the state to generate the revenue they need, they're going to have those discussions. And it's not going to happen next year during an election year. And it maybe in a lame duck session in 26, maybe 2027. But Pennsylvania needs to come to the reality that they need more revenue. And till we get there, I think we're going to see budget stalemates like this.
That's a positive note to end on. So any final thoughts, you guys, before we wrap this one up? And thank you both for joining me. I know that both of you tend to like to be behind the scenes, not in front of the camera, but you have a lot of knowledge and information that is really helpful to people. So thank you. Any final thoughts?
I like a lot of Tony.
Yeah, none.
All right. Well, thank you both very much for joining us, and we'll see you at the next episode of Insight and Influence.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to this edition of Insight and Influence. To learn more about C&G Strategies and to access previous editions, visit our website at cgstrategiespa.com.